Now, I'm not saying get rid of protest. I come to campus, people want to protest, that's fine with me. I'm used to it. I had 100,000 protesters, so a couple hundred doesn't bother me. But there's a difference between standing outside with a protest sign or even being willing to stand in line when speakers like me take questions and ask me a tough question, put me on the spot. That's fine. But just don't stop other students from being able to hear and have access to that point of view.
Governor Scott Walker, so great to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Good to be back.
And the fist pump, again, for the benefit of everyone. Coronavirus is around. I don't think it's
Plus
here.
we look pretty cool doing that.
No, I know, and I keep thinking, the people are going to say, okay, boomer, although I'm Generation X, I think, but...
I'm too. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, but actually, you're spending a lot of time on campus these days.
Yeah.
You've joined YAF, Young America Foundation, and free speech on campus is your thing. What are you up to?
Well, it is a big deal because we've got. I was just on Stanford's campus the other day.
Okay.
I just saw a few minutes ago some students from Cornell where they'd invited me a brief time before that to come. In each instance, major pushback, not just for me, but we bring in speakers like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Art Laffer, others,
right.
And it amazes me. Free speech should be free anywhere in America. It's guaranteed in our Constitution. The Bill of Rights spelled it out explicitly, and yet, of all the places where there's the biggest pushback for free speech when it comes to a conservative point of view, is on our college campuses. Completely outrageous. College campuses should be exactly the place where I've got two kids who went to college a few years ago. One's a graduate of Wisconsin, one's a graduate of Marquette. Both of them came out more conservative, but they were exposed to all different ideas. That's exactly what college is supposed to be about, that you get exposed to different ideas, to different people, different backgrounds, and that helps shape your future. Unfortunately, for a lot of these campuses, they talk about diversity, but diversity stops when you talk about political and ideological diversity. And that's just got to end. And frankly, that's not just something conservatives like me should be fighting for.
Right.
Anyone who cares about a free society should be caring about advocating for free and absolute speech.
Well, and to your point, there's this film recently with Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla, definitely not a conservative, but a fierce believer in free speech.
Right.
So there's a lot of people out there that it's kind of like people are awakening to this reality that you're describing. And I don't think it's just conservatives.
Well, one of the things I point out about the other day I was talking about the difference between freedom and socialism. And sometimes people say capitalism and socialism. I said it's much more complicated than that. Socialism isn't just an ideological, economic set of beliefs. In large part, we see whether it was in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the Soviet Union days, or whether it's been in Cuba or in Nicaragua or now in Venezuela, this idea of power to the masses often becomes concentrated power in the hands of the few. And one of the problems with that is oftentimes we've seen efforts both in the past and even today where they clamp down on free speech. Noriega, Castro, others like them would take any of the newspapers that raised any sort of concerns or complaints and shut them down or at least push them out. Today, it's more high tech. In places like Venezuela, when Maduro was under pressure, what we saw was for a time, state-owned internet access, they shut down access to things like Google and other social media outlets.
Right.
These are things, again, whether you're conservative or liberal politically, there should be a grave concern at any point when our society goes towards the problems we've seen elsewhere, when they stop the free and open expression of ideas.
Because, you would think that these ideas should be able to stand on their merits.
Exactly.
Right? And you could then decide whether I really want this or that, or...
Well, that's why it's so frustrating on many college campuses where you look and you go, say, to a political science department. Even some of our Ivy League schools have 100% of their political science department. The professors every one of them are identified as Democrat or even in some case socialist. No conservative voices, no alternative thought, no libertarian voices out there. If our young people are truly going to learn, they should be exposed to a whole spectrum of different ideas. It's just so incredibly frustrating. And what happens is not only do you not have conservative speakers, you don't have conservative faculty. YAF did a survey last year that found that 78% of conservative-leaning students were afraid to talk about that on college campuses. And it's not just about being afraid your professor is going to dock you down if you have a conservative thought, but it's even other students. And again, I think that only breeds the kind of division we see in the larger context in our society, where if it starts in college where you're afraid to even bring up your ideas, when you get beat up in the media and many outlets, when you get pushback out there, that creates that kind of tension that we see in today's society, which isn't good for anyone.
So so there is this almost kind of status quo of the sort of situation that you're describing. There's of course some of these conservative colleges like Liberty and so forth. Is there anything out there that you're aware of that's either actually trying to foster this discourse in a meaningful way or succeeding?
Yeah. Well, I think in addition to some of the places you mentioned and the programs we're involved with, I give credit to someone like Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, a mentor of mine. He's now the head of Purdue University. Excuse me, and at Purdue, he's adopted a policy very much like Princeton, not exactly the spot you would imagine this, or the University of Chicago. We did something similar with the University of Wisconsin system years ago, where they've adopted very clear free speech language as a university as a whole, and then put some teeth into enforce it. It's not enough. What happens is everyone claims to be for free speech.
Yes.
They'll put that, in their disclaimer. But then if a college student comes, and what we've had, for example, in some of our YAF-sponsored programs, we've had students, Beloit College, in my own backyard's a good example.
Right.
Last year, a bunch of protesters came, and someone went to speak, and they literally took all the chairs and stacked them up on the stage and prevented the speaker from even getting up there. Well, to me, there should be some sort of pushback, some sort of disciplinary action. Ultimately, in the worst case scenario, students being expelled if they block the ability of other students from hearing from voices they may not agree with. That's what a college and university should be all about. It's not enough to just say you're for free speech if you don't have a consequence for an action that blocks the ability of other students. Now, I'm not saying get rid of protest. I come to campus, people want to protest, that's fine with me. I'm used to it. I had 100,000 protesters, so a couple hundred doesn't bother me. But there's a difference between standing outside with a protest sign or even being willing to stand in line when speakers like me take questions and ask me a tough question, put me on the spot. That's fine. But just don't stop other students from being able to hear and have access to that point of view.
Right. No, it's amazing. So what examples of action have you seen in these universities that have been putting the teeth?
Well, I think the key is they've got to adopt the language, again, that we did, Princeton did, University of Chicago, Purdue. Again, not just the liberties.
So are you seeing in those places that these, let's say, conservative or alternative speakers are actually able to speak there?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what they do is they get rid of, there's none of this other language too. This sort of thing stops the triggering. It's, some people call it snowflakes. This idea that some campuses, and I remember last summer, Colorado State. I grew up in Wisconsin, but was born in Colorado, lived a little bit in Iowa. But I was shocked in Colorado at one of their universities that they actually have, as many do, language that of words they suggest shouldn't be used.
Right.
And it gets to this him, her, he, she, all this. But okay, that happens all over the place. That alone is disturbing. But they took it so far that they suggested that students and faculty not, in their draft at least, that students and faculty not use words like America and American. And their reason was somehow that suggests that America is better than other countries. Well, one, that's not what I hear, but two, I would actually personally argue we are not better because we're better people, but because the idea of freedom, what makes America exceptional is that we're a country where anyone, regardless of class, of income, of background, whether you were born here or came here, anyone in this country can succeed.
So basically like value judgments aren't allowed, right?
Yeah, and so to me, with the language I think is so important is not just to bring speakers in, but to say, you live on a campus, you got to be willing to be exposed to all different ideas, including those you disagree with. The epitome of this, and why it's a problem on our campuses, was something I saw during my early days as governor when there were protesters from not only within the state but around the country. One of the bumper stickers in Madison, our very liberal state capital, even the paper there acknowledged the irony. They put a picture up of a bumper sticker in Madison where the car had a coexist sign, so the bumper sticker with all the different religious symbols said coexist, and next to it it said recall Walker. The irony is saying coexist, but not if you disagree with me. If you disagree with me, we're going to kick you out of office or push you out of the way, and that's what's happening on this campus.
So, are you seeing interest in adopting these types of policies like Princeton, I guess Purdue now, and so forth?
I think the key is yes, and it's one of those where I think the important time to do it is not just in reaction to a blow up over a particular speaker. So it looks like it's just right. It's rather to have an open discussion about it without regard to one speaker or another. Oftentimes what we found is not only speakers aren't allowed, YAF chapters, which have been around since the 1960s. William F. Buckley started the organization. Ronald Reagan was the national chair. You've got a lot of the people here, a lot of the adults here, their first experiences were on YAF chapters or YAF conferences. But it's amazing to me that consistently we find that on many campuses, YAF chapters aren't even allowed. And oftentimes it's because they take something that somebody said out of context and they use it as an excuse to not allow a chapter.
Right.
Again, on a college campus, instead of worrying about protecting people's feelings who might be emotionally distraught about someone who has a different point of view than theirs, I think if we're going to live in a free society, we've got to respectfully. Now, we shouldn't be trashing folks. I don't go out and look for ways to personally attack folks, but I do challenge the ideas. To me, I fundamentally will challenge the fact that socialism fails. It has failed all throughout history. It will fail again going forward. The better contrast is free. I'm all for free stuff, free speech, free enterprise, free expression of religious beliefs, freedom. We should be able to have that kind of debate and not have people shut down just because others say they're somehow triggered by things as simple as freedom, which is the core of our existence in this country.
Governor Walker, I think that's a great place to finish up. Such a pleasure to have you.
Good to be with you. Thanks.